Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. And now that the Michael Gielen edition in 10 big boxes has been completed and 88 CDs or thereabouts, I think this is a good time to do a special conductor video for ClassicsToday.com subscribers featuring Gielen's 10 best recordings. And as usual, I do a little preview chat. And the preview chat, I think, is going to be most interesting because the preview chat is called Why Michael Gielen Hated My Liner Notes, which he did. And it's a fun story, so I want to share it with you. But in the meantime, if you have not yet subscribed to ClassicsToday.com, please feel free to do so using the link that I append to this video below. Now, let's just get right to the meat of it, shall we? Why did Michael Gielen hate my liner notes? It's a very interesting and educational moment for me. When I was just a boy, when he was doing his Mahler cycle for Hensler, I was asked by the label to write notes for some of those releases, which I agreed to do with great pleasure, particularly since my Mahler book had just come out, and it was, I felt like I was raring to go in talking about these symphonies. And as usual, my concept of a liner note for a recording is to really describe the music, what it sounds like, what a naive listener, someone who doesn't know the thing backwards and forwards should listen for, how it works, how it's put together, that kind of stuff. I'm not interested in biography. I'm not interested in the wider cultural context and all of that. That stuff is for another day. My concern is, here is the disc. Here's how you listen to the disc. That's the way I do it. There are other ways to do it. Michael Gielen hated it. Michael Gielen complained. I got an actual letter, not from him personally, but to the label. They shared it with me, in which he said that his objection to the liner notes was that I only limited myself to discussion of the music. And I should never have done that, because all I'm talking about is the music. He said that what you should be talking about is only, not the music at all. The music just speaks for itself, and you should be talking about the wider cultural context. And so for that purpose, he wrote his own essay, which is in there somewhere. I could wave it if I can go find it. But I mean, the liner notes are there. My notes are there, and then his later notes are there. And the essay was one of the most incomprehensible, incoherent, completely confused pieces of someone who should not be writing essays about these things that I've ever seen in my life. I really was just chuckling over it. I mean, I wasn't offended or anything. It's a legitimate way to do it. Don't get me wrong. You want to talk about music in its wider cultural context, that's fine. You want to relate it to major works of literature, that's fine too. But Gielen was every bit a self-styled intellectual, a hardcore intellectual. Given where he came from, both of his parents were musicians. His mother was a soprano. She was the sister of Edward Steuermann, who was the great Second Viennese School Schoenbergian pianist. And so that was Gielen's uncle. I mean, he was born into the Second Viennese School, into the dodecaphonic revolution. He had very strong ideas about what kind of music was legitimate and what kind of music was not. That is to be composed in the post-war period. He was immensely interested in literature and philosophy of the most, thought-provoking kind. Very thought-provoking. I mean, he was not, into popular literature. He was into elite, high-end intellectuality type literature. And, whether he was up to it intellectually, I have no idea. All I know is that this essay was just all over the place. Because what the essay tried to do was relate Mahler to a post-war cultural context full of authors and other people, and people who I haven't read, people who I guarantee 99.9% of the people who actually purchased the disc would have no idea what he was talking about. And so I considered that liner note particularly useless, and he considered my liner notes completely useless. And neither of us was wrong, whatever I think about his style as a writer. I mean, it's was a legitimate way of doing it. I had a legitimate way of doing it. So I wasn't like annoyed about the whole thing. I was sort of bemused. And it was really very interesting. But Gielen, because of these intellectual predilections, had this belief that music was about truth, and that truth was ugly and disturbing, and it should be painful. I mean, he wasn't wrong. Truth often is that way. The issue is whether or not music is attempting to reveal truth in that particular manner, right? A lot of composers do, a lot of composers don't. The entire post-war sort of concatenation of avant-garde composers was particularly concerned with making you as miserable as they possibly could. That was their mission, and they were very good at it. There was a lot of talent that went to work at making you feel terrible and pained. And Gielen wanted to just sock it to you unflinchingly. Sometimes he wanted to sock it to you unflinchingly in music that had nothing to do with that concept. But that was his overall philosophy, and he was proud of it. He said so. He was proud of it. He did not want people to be comfortable ever listening to him conduct, and that's why one of the reasons he was such a fascinating conductor. I don't think that was a bad thing. I think that was actually a very good thing. I think that it resulted in performances that were often revelatory and provocative and marvelous, and some that were simply miserable. And when that happened, it was what it was. But I do want to tell you, since there is this 10-volume Michael Gielen edition, what I think the 4 best boxes are, just so you know what I think the boxes are. And then you can go over to classicstoday.com and have a look at what I consider to be his 10 best recordings generally, some of which are not in any of these boxes, by the way. They are elsewhere, so you can't even begin to guess. Ha ha. So let's just look at some of them. Volume 8, I'm just picking them up at random. Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern. I mean, he was fantastic when it came to music of the Second Viennese School. That was his Fach. That was the music he knew as well as any human being who ever lived. And so this is really an essential box if you care about that music. It contains, 12 discs. Lots of Schoenberg, couple discs of Berg, couple discs of Webern, but it's mostly Schoenberg. Some of the best Schoenberg performances you'll ever hear in your life. Really, really splendid stuff. And a wonderful, wonderful monument to his devotion to that music, which he plays with incredible clarity and an unsentimental detachment, which is one way to do it. There are other ways to do it as well. I find it interesting to listen to his performances versus like Boulez, for example, because Gielen was really a much better conductor than Boulez was. It's especially when Boulez was doing this stuff at the beginning of his career. It's one thing to say be as precise as possible, which is what Boulez did. And I get the sense that one of the reasons he did that was because he didn't necessarily have the ability to do more. He later developed it. He became a marvelous conductor, but initially anyway. Gielen was a first-rate conductor of this music from the very beginning and had a very, very strong idea about what it should sound like. The issue with Gielen is that, first of all, these are radio recordings, which vary sonically. And second of all, the orchestra he had, the Südwestfunk Orchestra, the SWR is what they became, and originally SWF or whatever, was never a great orchestra. They were good. They were a solid radio orchestra that played a lot of contemporary music, which they could do quite well. But were they one of the world's great ensembles? No. But then again, Boulez had like the BBC Symphony, which was also not one of the world's great ensembles. So if you have to compare them, I generally prefer Gielen. I think he shapes the music in a way which is often quite a bit more convincing. But this is important. It's an important set and an interesting set, and I enjoy it. I enjoy listening to the music in Gielen's hands. I really do. Next, Volume 7. This I did a video about, and you should take a look at the video. This is just fabulous. This has got all kinds of stuff. It's got Janicek, it's got Zemlinsky, it's got Ruggles and Ives and Colin McPhee and Verez and Edward Steuermann and Debussy and Busoni and Reger and Franz Schrecker and Hindemith and Goffredo Petrassi and Strauss and Puccini and Wagner and then Ravel and Scriabin, and wow, Holy cow, it's just great stuff. Again, the sonics vary, but oh, it's so interesting to hear Gielen do this material. It really is. And you can check out the separate video I did on this particular box, which is quite marvelous. Also, definitely worth hearing is his Beethoven. His Beethoven is very striking. Gielen was one of the guys like Rene Leibowitz who tried to play Beethoven up to his metronome markings from the very start. And his approach of, well, if it's ugly, it's ugly. I'm not going to prettify the music, was really aesthetically so in keeping with what the period instrument people were doing, but it was way before the period instrument people were doing it in Beethoven cycles. And in addition to that, he was also, because he was so interested in historical context and the tradition of Beethoven performance and what it meant for contemporary man and its impact on humanity, and I mock it, but he was very serious about these things, and I'm not trying to make fun of him or belittle him. It gave his Beethoven depth. Even when he's following those metronome markings and blazing along, it has depth. It has meaning and significance because of the way he phrases and accents, and when he knows when to stop or slow down, when he knows what parts to emphasize and what parts to hang back on. There's nothing mechanical about it, even though it's extremely swift and bracing and very unsentimental. So I think his Beethoven is really worth listening to. There are 2 complete Beethoven cycles, by the way. There's miscellaneous Beethoven performances on top of it. There's lots of Gielen doing Beethoven, but this box gives you, an entire symphony cycle, actually more than one. Yes, you get some symphony cycle plus some more, and then lots of overtures, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful perspective on his Beethoven conducting, which was not monolithic either. So I think Volume 9 here is a big deal. From 1967 to 2007, his view of Beethoven, wonderful. And then the other one you just have to have, and we've talked about it before, is his Mahler. His Mahler is just extraordinary. He really understood where Mahler was in that wider historical context, whether his essay reflected it or not, and whether, and it has nothing to do with whether he liked my essay or not. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about these performances in the notes. He wasn't interested, but I was, because they're marvelous. They're absolutely marvelous. And you get a lot here. You get all the symphonies, plus you get the song cycles, the Songs of a Wayfarer, the Kindertotenlieder, and the Rückert-Lieder, and you get Das Knabe and Wunderhorn. Very well done. So you wouldn't think that Gielen would be good at those folksy, adorable things, but he was. He was, because, he had a conception. He was German, and the conception happened to work. He was the, regie conductor. He had a philosophy, a conception of everything that he did. And when it worked, it was absolutely fabulous. And when it didn't work, it could just be, oh my God. But, and he did a fabulous Mahler 10 in the Cook completion, more or less. And of course, Das Lied von der Erde is absolutely first rate. And Das Klagende Lied was on Orfeo. That's not in here. But it's one of the really, really great Mahler sets. So that's also, I think, essential Gielen. And, overall, I really admire the guy. I think he had absolute integrity. He grew up, by the way, in Argentina. His mother was Jewish. And so he wound up, his parents fled the Nazis in around 1940. And he was raised in Argentina and then, of course, came back to Vienna. Just an extraordinary personality, a difficult personality, someone who challenges us to think about music, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. Whether I agree with him or not, I have nothing but respect for the man, and I hope that you'll have a look at the ClassicsToday.com feature on his 10 best recordings and give them a listen too, because they are very, very worthy of your attention. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.